Put God first.
Your presence in their lives gives them validation.
Our children don't need us to be superheroes.
If you do these things, the next generation and the generations that follow will live in a world far better than the one we have today.
Men, stand up, be fathers.
Welcome to the Inspired Legacy Podcast, Season 1, Episode 4. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Mark Henderson, your host and founder of the Inspired Legacy. Our mission is to celebrate the gift of fatherhood and equip men to lead boldly, love unconditionally, and leave a lasting legacy with the belief that we can change the world one dad at a time. My guest today is Denny Allen. Denny, along with his wife, Karri, are the founders of Healing Hope Ministries in South Dakota, and it's an organization that helps parents and families find hope after the loss of a child of any age, to any cause. Now, they founded this ministry as a result of losing their own child in 2012. In this episode, Denny shares what it was like to lose their firstborn son at a very early age, as well as some common misconceptions about grief. Denny also shares several key points that enabled he and his wife to eventually cope with the devastating loss of their son, which allowed them to move forward and ultimately find true purpose in their pain. Denny, good morning. How are you, sir? Welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thank you so much. I'm doing great.
It is a pleasure to have you. Like we mentioned off air, it's been a challenge to kind of align our schedules, but I really appreciate you making time. This is going to be an important topic, and I can't even imagine how difficult of a topic it has been for you over the past many years. And I guess that's kind of a segue into the topic of today's discussion. But you and your wife have founded a ministry called Healing Hope Ministries that's really centered around helping people through the grief of losing a child. And we're going to dive into that a little bit more. But why don't you, for the sake of the listeners, just kind of give a brief introduction of who you are and what you do and what the ministry is about.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. And I'm so excited just to get some encouragement out there in this area of the grieving and particularly in the West, how we grieve. So thank you for this opportunity. And I met my wife about 10 years ago, and we're coming up on our 10-year anniversary.
Congratulations.
Yes, it's been a very long journey, and we joke about the first year of our marriage was the best year of our marriage because I got deployed a few weeks after we got married. So it's an inside joke that we always kind of say, and just this, particularly some of the things we've walked through.
And thank you for your service, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. We have 3 children. Asher is our oldest. He is in heaven now. And then we have Elijah, who is 5, and Isaac, who is 3. As I mentioned, I did serve in the military. I worked as a telephone technician for many, many years until we felt called to step into this area in this ministry full time. And how the ministry developed, I kind of alluded to it a little bit with the mentioning of Asher being in heaven. Asher passed away July 2nd, 2012, and I was in a very rough spot before he had died. I had tremendous issues with PTSD and depression and other issues from my life. And through that loss, we stepped into a ministry that called Smile Again Ministries, and they kind of led us down this path to, over the years, developed into us taking a step into this same area to minister to families and parents that have lost children to any cause of death at any age.
You guys have a book that you've put out that sort of captures your entire story and walks the readers through your journey of grief and ultimately finding purpose in your pain. And that's every time I have one of these interviews, I have to sit down and think about, well, what was the general theme? What can a logical title be? And even though you and I haven't even really talked yet, I kept coming back to this point of purpose and pain. Just kind of talk about that a little bit. I mean, first of all, I can't even imagine being in your shoes. I have kids of my own. I have a son. As I read most of your book, I mean, honestly, it was difficult at times to read through the tears in my eyes because it was just, like I said, I can't even wrap my brain around it.
There's so many misconceptions of grief. And this is, until you step into it deeply, and it's challenging. Grief is such a challenging thing that a lot of people don't even want to touch. And recently I was talking to a gentleman, and the discussion came up about, which I know we're going to touch on later, but it just came to mind of what to say and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
In the book of Job, Job's friends showed up, but what I had never taken in deeply is they didn't say a word for 7 days. And I read that, and I just read it a few days ago to make sure that's what is in the book of Job in chapter 2. And that set me back. So we will grieve, I believe, until I pass away.
Sure.
Till I enter heaven. But it changes dramatically. So it's pretty lengthy discussion just in that area, but to kind of give a snapshot on it is things change. You sit in your grief and be intentional about it. And I believe that's why my wife and I have the healing and the hope that we have that God has given us. A lot of people in the Midwest and in the Western culture, I shouldn't have said the Midwest, but a lot of people in the Western culture don't want to sit in it. They just we want to get through everything.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, there's no getting through grief entirely. It's a lifelong walk, we believe. It just changes and it looks differently day to day, year to year. And there's a lot of misconceptions out there on grief.
So talk us through some of those misconceptions. If somebody encounters somebody who has lost a child or a loved one, I mean, due to those misconceptions, I mean, how should people approach those people? What should people say, or what maybe shouldn't they say?
Some of the misconceptions are, time is the healer. A major thing that we learned from Pat and Judy Meisner that developed Smile Again Ministries, which we're basically bringing their ministry to Southeast South Dakota, is, we go off a linear timeline that, they're 3 months down the road and they should be here, and we judge each other that way. And it's been 1 year, and those kind of misconceptions of time, it really throws a wrench into the situation for the family that's walking through this painful event in their life, because it's a lifelong, it's changed everything. That doesn't mean they're not going to heal, but it's on their time. And we as westernized, the way we think, it's everything's got to be quick now, and it just does not work that way with grief.
That's an interesting point, though, you just touched on, and not to sidetrack you, but we are in a sort of a culture, especially Western culture, of instant gratification, right? Everything from microwave popcorn to apps on our phones. I mean, we get things right now. And so, like you said, the grieving process never really ends. And so in people's minds, I'm sure they want it to end, obviously, because it's painful. Nobody wants to go through that for an extended period. But is it safe to say that you have to reach a point emotionally and spiritually that it's an event that changed you and life will never be the same, and you have to overcome and adapt, so to speak?
I agree with that. Yes. It's basically you come to the acceptance, and that's a challenging word for people that have lost loved ones, that this actually happened. But once that acceptance settles in, and that settles into your spirit, it's that's where true transformation and healing and the reconciliation of all things can begin. So it's critical that people lean into this or step into it or start walking into this. And it's very uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable to sit in it. But my wife's and I's experience is we feel the reason we are, I can tell you we're thriving, and behind the scenes, we have our challenges in our marriage, in our families, as everyone does. But just looking back on, that date in July 2nd, 2012, I feel if we would not have stepped into and been intentional about walking this path and not burying it and not hiding from it, that's when the healing does not even begin. And so that's my encouragement. That's a big part of our ministry, is to get that message out there that you mentioned about things to say and not to say. And as the example that God gives us, telling the story of Job and his tragedy, which I cannot imagine. His friends showed up. They didn't know what to say. And that's the common thing for people that have death in their family. People show up and everyone is like, we all are the same way. We have a fear of saying the wrong thing. So what my wife and I love to encourage people is just show up. It's not about your words. It's your presence. Your presence is so powerful, especially in your loved ones' lives. Because honestly, Mark, there's nothing we're going to say to take the pain away and change the situation. But it's all timing also of when this event has happened in people's lives, how you can keep progressing down that relationship to guide these people back to their new normal is what they need to find.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, the new normal.
So
I love
it's.
Go ahead.
Nope, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I love the point you made a couple minutes ago here about just healing begins when you lean into the grief, when you embrace it and accept it. And there was a passage in the book that I ran across that really jumped out at me, and I think it was probably the turning point for you and Karri. And I'm just going to go ahead and read it just to kind of give the reader's sense of where you guys were and this turning point. And so this is your wife, Karri, talking here. This is hours after your son's death. You have a lot of people in your home, and your wife notices that you're missing. You have gone off by yourself, and she didn't know where you were, so she had been walking around the house looking for you and finally discovered you in your bedroom on your knees praying to God. And so she enters into the room. I'll just start reading here. I entered the room and knelt down beside my husband. Our marriage hadn't been perfect before Asher's death. It was far from perfect now. It was probably already on its way to becoming a statistic. But I made the choice to join Denny and kneel beside him, and in that moment, a miracle happened. Denny later told me that while he was on his knees, clinging to his Bible, he had heard the voice of God. There are a couple ways you can do this, son, the voice said. You can run toward me, and I mean run, not walk or crawl, or you can run away from me. When Denny looked up, he saw me kneeling beside him. He hadn't heard me come into the bedroom, but he was compelled to speak these words. There are two ways we can go here, he told me. We can either run toward God or away from him. I know which way I'm going because I've got nothing left. Do you want to come with me? And when I read that, it just really jumped out at me. I even highlighted it. And I think like I said, it had to have been a turning point for you guys, and it sort of sets the stage for, I think, how you guys have ultimately coped with this situation and, like you said, thrived since then, and that's through the power of God.
Amen.
So just kind of speak to that a little bit more, if you would. I mean, for anybody out there who has gone through this or is going through this or knows somebody who is going through this, it's one thing to say, it's another thing to actually do it. So how do you do it?
Reach out. there's so much isolation in the scenario of losing loved ones, and a lot of things create that isolation. And I believe with every part of my being that that's Satan that's coming against us to try to destroy us and separate us from each other and from God. And he does all those things for a purpose. So we have to be wise and be very intentional. And it's very challenging early on because I was stripped to my core, as you can kind of hear from that, what you read there.
Right.
That you can sense that where we were. And we tried to be extremely transparent with telling our story in the book. And so just being completely intentional about what you're up against, but then also knowing and holding on to hope that God is there. He never left. He called me into my bedroom, and I can't explain it. I didn't even recall that until we started to write this book, that moment. So we wrote the book 2 years ago now, which is not uncommon for people to not remember a lot of things early on in their grief process.
Sure.
But the most encouragement, I can just reach out and connect with people and look for those people that are walking and moving. And the word forward is challenging, but through, and because you never get over, you go through things, and with the intention to getting to the other side and completely through it. But like we talked earlier, I believe it's a lifelong process, but that doesn't mean there isn't healing. As I can tell you that my wife and I are thriving, and I say that confidently to give others hope that they will find joy again. But I believe the essence is to there's a lot of different resources out there. The grief counseling, the grief share groups, and compassionate friends, retreats that my wife and I are developing, and Smiling Ministries has, and they're all over. It's just trying to get plugged into the right thing at the right phase and stage of where you are personally, and not to give up, because it's the hardest work I've ever done in my life to stay afloat, to stay above all of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not by my strength. So it's a lot of encouragement in my life from solid men that have poured into me and just given me advice of, maybe you should think about this, or look at this, and keep your options open, and always continue to let people come into your life too, because they're there for a purpose.
Absolutely. And there's a famous quote, or I should say thought, out there in the ministry world, and that's, God reveals your greatest ministry through your greatest pain. And that is probably what keeps you going, right? Is that, I know you said you're thriving, but underneath it all, there's still that grief, because like we said, it never fully heals. You just, it's your new normal, and you just move through it. But this pain is something that drove you to establishing this ministry, and it's what keeps you going and keeps the ministry going, I would imagine. Is that a safe assumption? It
is. And telling our story and hearing other people's stories, the more another misconception that is out there is that if you talk about it, you just immediately break down. And that's true early on, but you're breaking down if you're talking about it or not. So it gets confusing early on. So then people misconceive, they stop talking and telling their story, because they think that's what's triggering all their emotion. But what we have learned through the mentorship of Pat and Judy Meisner and other wise counselors is the power is in telling your story. And the healing and the reconciliation is in telling your story. And hearing other people's stories is powerful also. So you can sit there with them and just be present. There's something so powerful about that. As a person walks through something, as my wife and I have, and if we sit in a room, even though we're not certified counselors or pastors even, we're just peers with that couple. They've lost a child, or grandparents have lost a grandchild. And for them to be able to speak freely, transparently, without judgment, there's something so powerful and healing in that. And then to start a small dialogue if it's necessary. A lot of times words are not needed. It's just presence.
Right.
It's that presence that is so powerful. So I hope I answered the question fully.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. And you've raised a couple points that I want to kind of go back and touch on. First, yeah, you guys, this ministry, and we'll dive into the specifics of what the ministry consists of here in a little bit, but you guys have done an outstanding job of telling your story, like you said, but then also providing an opportunity and equipping others who've walked in your shoes to tell their own story as well. What I'm curious about is this idea, at least through from the men's perspective, is, there's a lot of talk these days about masculinity and toxic masculinity, and in Western culture anyway, men have sort of been trained through just culture and media that to be a man, you got to be stoic and you've got to be tough, and it's not manly to talk about your feelings and to show the softer side of yourself, and everything that you've talked about so far kind of goes against that. So did you encounter any difficulty opening up and being transparent about any of this? And do you encounter that with any of the people that have come through your ministry? Is that a challenge that at least men face, is breaking through that shell of stoicism?
It's for men, it's particularly challenging because of the way culture is trying to form our thinking about each other. And what I have found is, and this is not my strength, but it's what God has done in my life, that I feel like I have more strength now than I ever have in my life, because I've allowed those to get maybe, I don't know, more acquainted with that side of my life of the feeling and understanding those things. And I have not got it figured out. I know women are just more connected in that area.
Yeah, they're just wired a little differently.
They're wired a little differently in the emotional side and expressing the emotion, and men generally struggle with that. But what I found, and my wife and I have found, and what Pat and Judy they've counseled a lot more families than we have they've been in operation for about 10 years, but the men are very reserved because of that label that we put on each other from society, and it's just a little hurdle to get through. But once they understand they're in a safe environment, they do start to figure it out and understand that, hey, that's a lie. All that stuff that we think about ourselves, that because these things they're inside of us, and they're going to come out somehow in some form.
Yeah, so and if they don't come out,
we want to deal with them. Yes, exactly.
If they don't come out in a healthy way, like you've described, like you said, they're going to come out in other forms, and those are maybe not always good or healthy, right? I mean, people could, I would imagine, very quickly turn to drugs or alcohol or violent behavior, or just go down the list of all the negative things that could come into your life. Like you said, Satan uses this as a way to drive a wedge into your own life, your spiritual life, the relationships you have with others. So yeah, I think what you guys have done, what you've created through your ministry, it's a healthy way to exercise those feelings and get them out there, so they don't just sort of brew under the surface and turn into something really nasty.
It can be very destructive. Statistics show as high as 88% of marriages end after the death of a child, which is staggering. But looking at that and walking through this, I can relate to that statistic. And we're just trying to make a small impact on that. That's part of our mission, is to slow that down, or be part of that, to help people understand that that does not have to be the end result. But it doesn't normally happen 2, 3, 4 months later. It's 2, 3, 4 years down the road. And they just, you mentioned the word separate, or, the division that Satan, that's his ultimate goal.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is unfortunately a very high statistic of what does happen a lot.
Yeah, you mentioned that in your book, and I read that, and it kind of blew me away. I mean, it almost seems kind of counterintuitive that you think that if you would go through a tragedy like that as a couple, that it would maybe bring you closer together, that you would lean on each other, but that's obviously not the case always.
Yeah, my wife we've talked about that deeply, and it doesn't make sense. It should draw you so close together, and like you said, and it just, and the statistics are challenging. That's the highest statistics that we find. It ranges quite a bit, but just through the watching, we've been walking with parents pretty early on in our loss. We kind of felt called to it, and we didn't organize our ministry officially until 2016, but it just, unfortunately, we've seen a lot of it, just through different groups we are involved with that we don't run or anything, but just a lot of the resources out there. You just kind of see the women showing up, but the men are not there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part, going back to that, the way we think about each other as man and woman, and how we project these different things on each other. The men don't really want to engage in those things, because they're going to think, everybody's going to think I'm weak.
Right.
But it's like, you show up, you got to fight for this. You have to get engaged, because something so precious you've lost, and you don't want to lose more.
Yeah. It's such a good reminder for men out there that it is not weakness to be transparent and vulnerable with your feelings. There is strength, I believe, in vulnerability, and men especially, have to remember that when they're going through tough times, that there's nothing wrong with realizing that you need help and knowing that there's other people out there who can help you, and reaching out. And I think, like I said, there's more strength in that than there is just bottling up those feelings and letting Satan go to work.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Well, Denny, we've talked about your ministry a lot, but we haven't really unpacked what it is exactly. So I want to give you an opportunity to fully explain Healing Hope Ministries, what it is, how it helps people. So maybe just walk us through, put us in the shoes of somebody who maybe has just lost a child. How do they find you? And then walk us through that process of working with your ministry, and what that looks like, how people can actually apply that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Our mission is obviously to walk with and help parents and families find hope again after the death of a child. And how we try to implement that is let them know that we are safe individuals to share their story with, just to build a relationship and start connecting with. And what our mission is we are in the process right now. We're hopefully about 2 months away from our guest house being fully finished, weather permitting and all that. We're in the Midwest, and it's January, so we're optimistic that 2019 we will be housing guests on site. We are located between Beersford and Alcester, South Dakota. And how parents generally aren't the ones that find us. It's their loved ones that hear about us, and they make the initial call. And then we just kind of start building a relationship with them, so they understand who we are and how we approach things, and they get to understand where our hearts are, what we're really there to serve their loved one. And that's who we honestly wrote the book for also, is not the parent directly, but the family unit. But that's how most people find us. And at the phase we are in our ministry now is we just go to these parents where they are, since our facility is not fully completed. We may just go and have coffee Sometimes we go to the parents' homes, wherever we can physically connect. A lot of times it might just be phone calls and even some email type things.
Sure.
So that's the phase we're at right now. And 2019 is going to be the year where we start bringing people on site, and what a typical retreat looks like is the parents will come and stay for 3 or 4 days. And we just spend those 3 or 4 days being very intentional, focusing on different things that we basically learned from Smile Again. And that put us on the path to where we are today. We felt deeply compelled that's why that along with, you have to do multiple things. But the ministry is still developing in the physical aspect, the location wise, but that's a little bit of a snapshot of how people can find us, and they can find us on the internet. Our book can be found on Amazon.com.
And your website address is healinghopes.com, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
We'll be sure to
Hope with an S. But the name of our ministry is Healing Hope, but it's healinghopes.com. That's correct.
Got it. We'll be sure to link to that in the show notes. So if people want to reach out and learn more, they can easily find that, as well as the book. Denny, gosh, there's so many more questions I have for you. I feel like we could maybe even have you back and unpack this further, or maybe even take a look at it from a different perspective. Is there anything else that you want to cover or touch on?
Just to leave this with those that are walking alongside people, just to encourage them that, in our book we give some say this, don't say that, and it boils down to presence. And where we feel Satan really enters in is fear. And people get scared to even show up. Because they're thinking, I'm not going to say the right thing, I'm not going to do the right thing. They go to that train of thought. And I would just it's in my spirit to encourage people just to step into this and sit with them, take the lead of Job's friends, and just listen more than anything.
Mm-hmm.
And just to be there. And one of the most powerful things you can tell a loved one is, this has to be sincere, obviously. So if they're struggling with what words to say, some men that I have become friends with that have lost children, a few of them had said in different phrases, but in essence, someone came to me and said, I'm here for the long haul. And that is what we need to do for our brothers and sisters that are struggling, and all people, that we can just tell them that we are there and that we don't have the answers, but I'm with you, because they are in such a place of isolation. Because there's, like you said, Mark, there's so many different angles we could talk about these different things. But it's worthy of talking about and exposing, and not to fear at all.
Well, I'm so proud of you and your wife for, like you said, stepping into your pain and realizing your purpose through it all, and developing this ministry to help others who have walked in your shoes or are walking in your shoes. Is we pray that nobody needs your services, but we know that that's not always going to be the case. And it's nice to know that something like this exists for those who are struggling. Denny, as we wrap up, I always like to ask people what their definition of an inspired legacy is. I think that legacy is kind of a hot topic right now. You are clearly establishing a strong legacy with your ministry and how you and your wife have persevered through your grief. But curious to hear in your own words, when you hear the phrase an inspired legacy, what does that mean to you? What is your definition of an inspired legacy?
Yeah, I've been mulling it over in my mind ever since you sent me that question, and it's just inspired is just, I love that word. It spurs the thought that this came from somewhere else. It was a gift or it was given. And in my mind and where we are in our life and the road we've been walking on, I just feel it's just that legacy that's being driven or inspired, obviously is the word you use, but that people are led into hope and healing and the reconciliation. And I've been struggling with how to define it, honestly. But I love that question. And it's really going to spur a lot of thinking in my mind, because in the back of all of our minds, legacy is there. If we address it or not, if we're intentional about talking about it or not. But I'm really struggling with that, Mark. I'm sorry.
No, it's no worries. Like I said, there's so much more we could talk about. I plan on having you back at some point in the future. And if you want to pass for now and you can answer at a later date, that's fine too. But it is an interesting thought, and it does kind of get one thinking about, well, how do I, like you said, we all leave a legacy, whether we realize it or not, whether we intentionally leave one or not. It's just a matter of how intentional it is and how positive it is, and whether or not we let the Spirit lead us in defining that legacy. That's
absolutely, and that's to die to self and to be led is something that we continue to strive to be mindful of. That is this something I am desiring, or is this something God's leading me to? And I think that ultimately will show in a person's legacy of their life from other people's viewpoints of all that. All right, man, we've set the stage. You're going to be back someday, so be waiting for that call. Sounds good. I'd love to put my cell phone number out there too on this, so you bet men in particular could just call me directly or text. Outstanding. To let them really know that I'm available. I'm completely transparent, and this is all I do. Yeah, go ahead and rattle it off, and then we'll be sure to list it in the show notes as well. Men can reach out to me directly with my cell phone. It's 1-605-321-1875, and they can email at denny@healinghopes.com, and we're readily available. And for those people, another little side note is people that are walking with their friends that are grieving, that they understand that a retreat like this is that we're designing is for about 3 months after the loss is a good time frame. They do definitely need to be in counseling if they feel they need to, or that's something they're open to as soon as possible for support, pastoral care. That support is so critical early on. And just the family unit coming around them, and where a ministry like ours would come in is about 3 months is when they should attend a retreat. You're kind of in shock till that point. Sure. So that's just something I kind of wanted to give you information on, and if that gets tied in here somehow. Yeah, absolutely. No, that's good information to have, and we'll include that as well. And encourage those listening, again, if you're going through this or know who somebody is, don't just subscribe to this show, but share this episode and get it in the hands of people who are going to benefit from it. Because Denny and Karri have walked in your shoes and know what you're going through. And like you said, Denny, 2019, big things are going to be happening for you guys. And so we're happy to hear that and anxious to see how things develop. And like I said, want to have you back on. Maybe you can give us an update on your retreat. And so just, super excited for you guys. And again, Denny, super appreciative of you making this happen and coming on the show and sharing your story. Thank you very much, Mark, and have a blessed day, and keep up this wonderful mission of yours, and help and strengthen men and build this community. I'm very excited about what God is doing through this. So very thankful for the opportunity and to be a small part of your adventure. Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Denny.
I can't imagine having lived through what he and his wife lived through, losing a son. But it's important for us to understand and know how to deal with a loss like that and how to comfort those around us who might be going through something similar. If you guys, again, took anything away from this episode, will you do 3 things for me? Subscribe to this podcast, leave a 5-star review on iTunes, but most importantly, again, if you guys know anybody who could benefit from today's message, share this episode with them. If you guys want to follow the show online, you can visit theinspiredlegacy.com. And again, you're going to find links to our Instagram and Facebook pages there, as well as a host of other content that we try to update on a fairly regular basis. And if you're looking for ways to keep your axe sharp, surround yourself with guys who are like-minded, I want to invite you to join our free and private Facebook group. You're going to find encouragement, support, and accountability, spiritual growth, and the link to that group is actually in the show notes. Again, I want to thank you guys for listening today. It was a tough topic, but an important one. Remember, subscribe, leave a review, and share our message, because I really do believe that when we work together to lift up fatherhood, we're going to change the world one dad at a time. Until next time, live inspired.